My personal perspective on cyber threat does by no means represent the entire industry perspective. As many of you who have dealt with information security probably know that everything is right and everything is wrong in information security. Everybody has a perspective. And today I'll share with you my personal perspective on this matter. The black swan. How many of you know what a black swan stands for? Of course, not the American space. No? Ah, another one. Okay, French also no. A black swan stands for significant event, but unlikely to happen. And it was popularized by an American Lebanese writer in a famous book called by the same name, called The Black Swan. It was published after the 2008, or close to the 2008 financial crisis. And he predicted actually the financial crisis. And he made a lot of money, $150 million, because he managed a fund that predicted this outcome. Today I'm arguing, I'm submitting to you that insider threat is the information security black swan. It goes under the radar. Why? First, it's a minority of the threats. 17% to 21%. As I said, all the numbers are right along at the same time in information security. We have a lot of numbers. 17%, 21% report that the successful hacks have been perpetrated by insiders. About 50% from outsiders, and 20% we don't know. Why don't we hear about it? 70% of the insider threats are handled quietly. At least personally, I would not want to go to my manager and tell them somebody on my team has screwed up or is fraudulent, unless I absolutely have to. Why does it happen? It happens because people who entrust us know the inside out of our organization. Whether there are clerks who know the process and know how to navigate the process, or network admins, as I used to be, who can have access to the entire infrastructure and can handle it and can go and that cause damage to the infrastructure. In a famous case that happened 2 years ago, a network administrator who was fighting over his salary. I'm not going to do that for you, Ray. I'm happy. He was fighting over his salary, totally unsatisfied. A place what's called a logic bomb. It's a type of virus that fires after a certain amount of time, 3 months, predicting that he would be fired. He placed it on the day he was fired. 3 months later, at 9:30 in the morning, the bank found, I think, close to 2 million records disappeared. The virus itself erased itself, and the trace in the logs have been also vanished. The cost was multi-million dollars, as you can expect. The share price went down by the equivalent of $1.2 billion. So the question then becomes, by the way, they arrested him 6 months after the fact, only after they brought a forensic company that analyzed the backup data that luckily was not within his possession and reverse engineered what happened. So the question is then, why? Well, it's a very significant problem. We all know it will happen, as in the bank, as he said earlier, will disclose information. Why is it happening still? And why aren't you paying attention to it? Because of the assumption. We're making a fundamentally false assumption that insider threat is more or less the same as external threat. And it's totally not true. First is patterns. We are entrusted as employees of a company who is doing a certain function, and therefore we're giving authorization to do it. We have access. How can you tell if the access is used to do the job or to do some illegal activity? Access misuse. That's not true of external threats. Second, we're inside the castle already. We're not outside the castle. So all the defenses we have, all the good defenses we have, are irrelevant. Some are relevant, of course, depending which one we're in, but many are not. And lastly, we tend to be more relaxed with people who are within our team with access control. Yalla, as we say in Arabic, it's okay, you can have more access. It's not really hardly implemented, versus an external threat where we deploy it and implement it much more strictly. Not only we make an assumption that the patterns are similar, but we also make the assumption that the controls, how we combat that, are similar. This is not true as well. External is relying more and more on what we call technical, techies like me in the information security, called technical controls. He referred to non-technical controls in his presentation. Technical controls refers basically to a device that, or a process or people that at the end they're using a technology to make control of what you combat. Non-technical controls deal with two things: management and process. When it deals with the internal threats, we rely heavily on non-technical controls. External threats is relies heavily on technical controls. By definition, non-technical controls are different. They deal with human behavior. Very different kettle of fish. And because of that, and because we're dealing with human behavior, it doesn't fall naturally under risk management or IT, depending where this function is in your organization, right? So it will have to have corporate buy-in. You will rely on HR, legal. The entire corporation has to be involved in the process. So what is the solution? This is my own personal simplified paradigm. It's of course much more complex than that. But we start with the first two steps. As I told my grandmother when I was in Egypt recently, when she thought her jewelry, I told her incorrectly that her jewelry is worthless, which is a big mistake. I didn't have dinner that night. But the organization has to determine what is their jewelry, what is important. Not me as a consultant, not anybody else, the owner of the information. The second step is you have to determine what threats are relevant to you. In Canada, for example, if somebody here is from Chinese origin, no disrespect, but we've been subjected to Chinese hackers sponsored by the Chinese government. This may not be relevant to you in a different country. It has to be relevant. So the threat has to be relevant. You have to have the proper definition of what you're doing. That's the first step. I cannot overemphasize corporate buy-in. You have to have the corporate buy-in. If it is a should for external threat, it's a must for internal threats. And lastly, you analyze what type of controls, as Dennis said in his organization, in his presentation. You analyze what controls that you can implement within your framework. And lastly, you determine. You assign and you implement who can do it, internally, externally, or combination of both. Let's look at a deeper look. As some of you who did the webinar a few days ago are familiar with this triangle, I love this triangle, especially because it's red and blue, and I'm colorblind, so that's the easy colors for me to see. Fundamentally, we're dealing with a crime. And like any crime, it has to have three elements. Any police enforcement it will tell, please don't correct me if I'm wrong. I have three elements. Why I'm doing it, what's the desire to do it, ability, can I do it, do I have the tools to do it, do I have the technical skills to do it, and lastly, do I have the opportunity? Back to the jewelry. I can reach with my hand and take a jewelry in a museum if it's open. But if there's a camera or a policeman watching, I don't have the opportunity to take it. Let's take a look. When we're dealing with motive, we're fundamentally dealing with predicting human behavior. And as I learned very quickly with my ex-girlfriend, this is an impossible task. You deal with variety of controls. Behavioral monitoring, what does this mean? Is he late to work? Is he, or she by the way, is he very defensive in meetings suddenly? Does he suddenly take longer lunches? There is a change in their behavior. We're trying to predict if they have a trigger. Are we applying as an organization consistent policies across the board? Like kids, if we see that the policies are not implemented properly, we suddenly have self-justification to cause damage to the organization that's not treating us fairly. I'm not going to go in all the examples, we can talk to them in our round table, but I would like to emphasize regular and routine background checks. Like you bring somebody to a family, you get married, or you ask, you want to know what their background is. But unlike a marriage, which is hopefully one-time deal, in a company you need to do it regularly, every year, because people change. Minimizability. You need to give authority and knowledge only enough to cause the person to be able to do their job, enable them to do their job. But there's a catch. If you make it too cumbersome and too complicated, people do one of two things. They will leave. Thank you very much, this is not for me. Or they will cheat. As I'm sure we were having a discussion last night, is that if you're making so many rules, like in Russia or some parts of the Middle East, eventually people say, you know what, forget it, I have to do my job. I'll walk around that. So it has to be reasonable. So it has a ceiling, it has a limit. But fundamentally, it deals with minimizing the access to whatever you need to do your job, minimizing the knowledge to what you require to do the job, and enforcing it using mechanism of access control. Lastly, is reducing opportunity, the cameras. This concept, information security, is no different than any other field of security. City of London, when they were faced with violent attacks with some political opponents many years ago, they implemented what some of you may have noticed if they ever had the chance to visit London, CCTV, cameras everywhere. The problem with cameras everywhere is that you have footage of everybody. Everything is being recorded. So, do you see the bad guy? If you have less cameras, you have less footage, and therefore you may not catch a bad guy. If you have too many cameras, you have a lot of footage, but you also may not catch a bad guy. The problem is, in our field, defined as the problem of false positives. You have a mountain of data, and you're looking for the one true bad guy, and to analyze it. So you have to analyze everything. So the objective, the requirement for the opportunity to be implemented properly is to have efficient and timely and effective way of dealing with false positives. Let's look at the summary. Motive, as I said, is deal with human behavior. By definition, it's the least effective. If we could predict behavior, we would have no crime. It's very simply put. It can minimize, but it cannot eliminate. Ability is more effective for sure. It relies on non-technical controls, process and management. It has some technical implementation, but again, it has a ceiling, because if you make it too complicated for people, they're not going to work for you, or they're going to cheat. Monitoring is very effective. It's purely technical, more or less, and it's more effective if you deal with the false positives. So what do you need to do to deal with the false positives? You need to have variety of criteria. I've here highlighted 4 of them. One, you have to have a true separation of duties, an out-of-process organization. It cannot be the same person who has designed and implemented the cameras in London also monitoring it, because he will know, or she will know, how to cheat the system. And even if they are well-intentioned, they will have a blind spot. You need somebody else, different management, different structure. You need to have a true match. I'm an original engineer, and as my biography says correctly, I have an MBA. Oh, wow. Okay. And as engineers, we are trained to design and build. We're not trained to monitor. So we don't have a match for us. We get bored. You need somebody who views monitoring and looking for false positives as a career, not an opportunity. A true policeman, not a bouncer at a bar, will find this boring while he's doing his job, while he's doing his studies. Our friend network administrator, could have been easily prevented from doing this if the log files simply had been kept off premises. Because he would not have been denied the ability. He would have had the ability, but he would have denied the opportunity. He would know somebody else is watching the log files. And finally, as I said, you have to have effective, efficient, and timely mechanism to deal with false positives. Some of these feed into this. I submit to you that this is fit for a service provider. Why? The service provider can do all of the above, all what we said before, but they can bring to the table some value nobody else can bring to the table. Not you, not somebody who's looking for it. First, they have the global knowledge. They're dealing with multitude of clients. And when you deal with multitude of clients, you have a global view. If you're monitoring only yourself, I'm always talking to myself. I will only know about myself. They have no informal relations. They don't have lunch. It's an organization outside. So as he said about paper versus reality about the process, well, yes, in process you can have very good process, but in paper you are mixing it because I'm having lunch with a friend who happens to be the designer. Would I report if some breach happened that shows there is a weakness in design? Maybe, but maybe not. Organizations outside a service provider, its own self-interest, not because they're good, self-interest, is to show that they have value. And to show they have value, they have to show you that there is problems. And to show you there is problems, they have to observe. A competent service provider, they have to observe no conflict of interest and unbiased. They have to be neutral. Because they're monitoring. It's like a police. Can you imagine a police who has a side job? It's not going to be a policeman. Some of us have encountered some of these in different countries. It's not going to be a policeman. It's not going to do very effective monitoring. A service provider not only can do monitoring, but they can do something else. They actually can do review. Going back to access control. If it's not implemented properly, if it's not configured properly, you don't want to review it yourself. Even again, they're honest people. You want a pair of eyes that go outside from the organization and they look at it. So in conclusion, I would like to leave you with this quote that I love very much. For those who believe in God, I believe in God. In God we trust. All others we monitor, without exception. We somehow